Okay, good morning, everyone. Nice to see everyone. We were looking at the topic of Olam HaBa, the world to come, and Techiat HaMetim, the era of Mashiach, and I just really wanted to cover a few more related topics to this. The first one was a couple of questions that came up last time based on some of the discussions, and then a couple of you have emailed or WhatsApped to me since the share. One question that came up, and I'll just mention very briefly because I did cover this, is what's the purpose of Yemos HaMashiach and Techiat HaMetim, according to the Rambam, instead of going straight to the last stage of Olam HaBa, which is back to the world of Neshamas, back to the world of soul or consciousness existence alone. And I think I discussed the answer last time, and I'll just mention this again. The Rambam speaks about this and seems to say that the purpose is in order to ensure that everyone has a chance. In other words, since the purpose of us human beings is to live in an era, in a time in which we don't have the stress of, in which we don't have the distractions of life and the pressures that don't allow us to focus on that which we're meant to focus, which is our spiritual and intellectual connection to Hashem. Therefore, Olam HaBa, therefore Yemos HaMashiach and Techiat HaMetim, which comes with it, is to give everyone a chance to live in the Messianic era when we don't have these distractions. According to the both the Mekubalim and the Rambam, we ultimately live with an eternal existence. Whether this eternal existence is in some shape or form still in connection to our physical bodies, as per the Kabbalists when they talk about Techiat HaMetim, or whether it's purely as a soul, as per the Rambam in his understanding of Olam HaBa. Nonetheless, this is still an existence maintained by God, maintained by Hashem. We're still existent in terms of the reality of our existence as founded upon the only true existence, the only absolute existence which there is, which is that of God. And on the contrary, our existence we exist to the degree to which we are connected to the absolute existence, the existence of God. And in a sense, this gives us a new formula or new way of phrasing the choices that we make in life and the reason we need to make these choices. If existence, ultimate or existence, eternal existence, which we are granted by Hashem, can only derive from His existence, then it can only we can only exist to the degree that we can balance two paradoxes. On the one hand, that we are part of His existence, and on the other hand, that we exist as independent beings. Either of the extremes would be easy to achieve. The challenge is, how do we achieve the balancing act between the two? On the one hand, were independent objects, entities independent of Hashem, capable of existence, then existence would be possible even without an attachment to Hashem. But since existence ultimately derives from God's existence and can't contradict His ultimate, unified, eternal existence, so how is there space for us humans to exist as independent beings? And the answer can only be because we have some independent existence. But then how do we balance independent existence with the existence of Hashem? And this brings us back to the discussions we had when we spoke about Bechira and free will, that this is where the concept of Bechira comes in this way of thinking. To us choosing to recognize that Hashem is the only absolute existence, we believe that we can have our cake and eat it. We choose, and therefore our choice, us, are intertwined with the result which is achieved, which is recognition of our bittul, of our nullification to the existence of Hashem. And this is how we feel we can have both parts. Malachim, angels, as soon as they achieve their mission, cease to exist. And we discussed this when we spoke a little bit about this topic, and we will revisit in this forum, please God, in the future, what the concept of angels are. But Malachim cease to exist once they have done their mission, because they don't have an independent sense of self. Their whole sense of self is merely that of Malach, an agent, a shliach, a messenger. Their sense of self is bound up with the achievement and the outcome and the message which they are delivering. And as soon as that has been achieved, there is no gap anymore. If you think of a message as trying to change the situation, the world is in situation B, A, but it needs to be in situation B. And the Malach's job is to shift it from A to B. So as soon as that has happened, whatever gap existed between the way the world is and the way the world ought to be, from the perspective of the Malach, has been cleared up, and there's now no longer any gap between its own sense of existence and self and that of God, and therefore it ceases to exist. With human beings uniquely, we are capable of being malachim. We ought to. We need to become malachim. We need to become angels. We need to be messengers of moving the world from A to B, in other words, achieving that which ought to be, and yet still maintain our own sense of existence. How can that balance be achieved? Only because it is our choice which brought about that existence, and therefore our existence is bound up with the outcome, and through that we achieve becoming part of God's existence. Our existence is maintained through the absolute existence of Hashem. And this is an idea which, to the best of my knowledge, is shared both by the Rambam and the Mekabalim. He spends a lot of time talking about the differences between them, but in their core, there is this which is a commonality. I must say that the Rambam doesn't speak exactly, specifically about how he resolves the unity of God with our existence, to the best of my knowledge. I've long suspected that in this element, the Rambam is the same as the Mekabalim, and that there's a pantheistic element in the Rambam also, not in terms of the choices we make and our sense of self, but in terms of the bedrock of our existence. Our existence is predicated, is built, is founded upon the existence of Hashem. And I saw this fairly recently in the last couple of years in the newly published notes of the lectures that Rav Yoshev Soloveitchik, Yoshiva Vayu, gave on the Moed Nevuchim, in which he says exactly the same thing. And I believe that this is an accurate representation of the view of the Rambam, though I can't exactly prove it. It just seems to emerge from everything he says. I don't have a source text to show you on that one. So this would appear to be how our existence in Olam HaBa is maintained as per our existence now. We are given the gift of existence by God. Not, in that sense, nothing changes. We talk about having earned our existence, but we've earned our existence in the sense that we've made choices. But the very gift of existence continues to be one granted to us by Hashem. The other point to mention is that the eternal existence of Olam HaBa would appear not to be static. It is still a situation of growth and change. Chazal expressed this, quote is in Rashi on Parshas Vayeshev, that Tzadikim, Bikesh Yaakov Lasheves Bashalva, or Yaakov wished to dwell in peace. And Chazal say Tzadikim ein lehem menucha, they don't have peace. Lo ba'olam hazeh, not in the life, lo b'chayolam hazeh, not in the life of this world, and lo b'chayolam haba, not in the world to come. I shouldn't have translated they don't have peace, they don't have rest. In a menucha, they don't have non-movement in this world or the next world. In other words, growth and change continues in Olam HaBa also. It's also a state of fluidity. How can we resolve motion with eternal existence? The answer is the picture, the image one should have is of an asymptote. An asymptote in maths is a curve which moves ever closer to the axis, but never hits the axis, never reaches it. And this is the state of motion that we have in Olam HaBa. Why is there motion? Because as we become ever more aware of the reality of God's existence, we draw ever closer to him. And therefore there's a circularity to it, this, in which we draw ever closer to an awareness of him as the root of our existence, the spirituality of the root of our existence, that the only true existence we have isn't our physical and mundane bodily, material existence, but is that of spirituality. Or to make this more comprehensible, we can translate that into terms we understand, that of the value of an eternity and absolute value of acts of chesed and morality and giving us. An act of chesed is something that's eternal. It doesn't cease to exist. The world can move on in another 15 billion years. An act of kindness I did still remains. And we become ever more aware that this is true existence, but we never achieve absolute, complete awareness of it, because that would negate our very own existence. There's always an I, a me, and a him relating to each other, ever deepening relating to each other, but never one that becomes so all-encompassing that my existence becomes swallowed up in his existence, and I cease to have my own I cease to be an independent existence. Were I to cease to be an internal, independent existence, this would be true pantheism. This would be a non-existence of myself, which in our thinking is a contradiction in terms. Because what would be the point of my existence were I to cease to exist? It would leave unresolved all the time period or experience of independent existence. The only thing that justifies our independent existence is because it brings about the ever deepening awareness of the absolute existence of Hashem, who does the act of altruistic giving, of chesed, of bringing us into being. So the greatest gift is the act of altruistic chesed, Olam chesed yiboneh, that Hashem created us and brought us into being, and that gift is never taken away from us. We maintain our sense of self, our being, my ability to say there's a me here, there's an I here who exists, but that existence grows we grow ever more in that existence. It's ever more expanded to the degree that we grow ever more aware of the absolute value of existence if we choose to use our lives, or some of our lives, part of our lives and part of our existence, for chesed. So I think this gives a little bit of an overview of what we mean by these terms, Olam HaBa, Techiat HaMetim, Mashiach. Mashiach, according to everyone, is the period of bodily existence post the physical and bodily existence we are used to here. The Rambam maintains that it's not that very different to our existence now. It's just without the distractions of the hassle of life, the persecution of life, the need to struggle to earn a livelihood. It's an opportunity for undiluted spiritual growth without distractions that life normally poses. And that's the purpose of Yemos Mashiach. Everyone agrees that the purpose of Olam HaBa is the world of reward. Olam HaEmes, it's the world of, we use the word Olam HaEmes not just because it's truthful in the sense that those who receive respect for non-achievement here in this world, it's the world of truth in the sense that we sort of academically understand what is right and what is wrong. Because the Olam HaEmes in the sense that our whole existence is bound up with truth. We only exist to the degree that we truly exist. This is a deep understanding of what we've said previously, schar mitzvah, mitzvah, schar vera, vera. We exist to the degree to which we have remolded and remade our existence into one of real worth and value, the degree to which we have integrated mitzvahs, spirituality into our personality. The pain and suffering of punishment is the degree of non-existence that we have, our awareness that we don't exist. The reward is the pleasure and the experience of existing to the degree that we've chosen to exist, and everyone agrees this is Olam HaBa. The machlokus is, to what degree is this Olam HaBa existence as souls or minds detached from bodily existence, or as souls and minds continuing to be embodied within a bodily existence, perhaps reflecting the difference between the Rambam and the Mekolim as to what degree Judaism is about achieving conscious and mind and intellectual perfection, or to what degree is it about achieving holistic, whole body perfection. But that's a summary of the different perspectives between the Mekolim and the Rambam on this subject of Olam HaBa and Mashiach and Techiat HaMetim. I do want to take this in several further directions, somewhat triggered by the questions that have been asked, including looking at the idea of Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben Yosef, and Gilgulim, before we then move on in future shiurim to look at the place of non-believers and the role of the fundamentals of faith in this, which several of you have asked me about both in the share and off-group. But before I go any further, just in terms of what we've spoken about, Yemos Mashiach, Techiat HaMetim, are there any questions? Otherwise, I'll move on.
Yeah, can I just... I think you said Olam HaBa, one Kabbalist versus the Rambam. One holds Olam HaBa followed by Techiat HaMetim, and the other holds Techiat HaMetim followed by Olam HaBa. Forgive me if I'm not quite following this, but I thought Techiat HaMetim will occur at some point. What happens in the situation where Techiat HaMetim hasn't happened yet? One goes straight to Techiat HaMetim, but there is no Techiat HaMetim.
After death, everyone agrees that we enter into a world of only neshama existence, which we can call Olam HaBa if we so choose. But in a sense, this is a somewhat of a borrowed term. After our only soul-like existence, those of us who aren't alive when Mashiach comes will experience at some later stage Techiat HaMetim. According to the Mekolim, that's it. That's the real Olam HaBa. According to the Rambam, this is simply a chance to live in bodily form again and continue to achieve in order then again to die and re-enter the world of souls only, of spiritual or intellectual or mind existence only, consciousness existing only, which is what we call, which is the true Olam HaBa.
So Techiat HaMetim is eternal, according to one view.
According to the Mekubalim, Techiat HaMetim is eternal. According to the Rambam, Techiat HaMetim is a temporary stage, which will then get back to our true existence, which according to the Rambam is not embodied. A human being is a mind primarily in the Rambam's thinking. He doesn't just mean by that intellect, it means consciousness and the holistic sense of consciousness, not as a sort of dry and philosophical as it can be understood, but ultimately a human being is the mind, and it's that existence which matters.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask, why does the Rambam think that Hashem wants us to go through a period where pressures of anti-Semitism and war are removed? It sounds nice, but why, when we don't have it in this world?
Because according to the Rambam, this gets us onto a deeper subject in the Rambam, but ultimately, according to the Rambam, if one hasn't been able to maximize, or even let's leave aside the word maximize, if one hasn't been able to achieve an awareness of Hashem in a very, in a very real sense, a very profound sense of connection and understanding of what God is and what the reality of the human condition is, and the nature of the world within which we live is, then even if this isn't one's fault, and one hasn't done this because of limitations of one's gift of intellect or time that one can dedicate to these sorts of spiritual and intellectual pursuits, the reality nonetheless is one hasn't done it. And therefore one hasn't got the possibility of a more profound spiritual existence, because one simply hasn't carved oneself, molded oneself into that sort of spiritual and intellectual being that the Rambam believes one needs to be. And therefore, we need the period of Olam HaBa of Yemos HaMashiach to give us all a chance to do this without the distraction of the more difficult life that we live now.
So it's lowering the bar, effectively, in terms of Bechira. It's making it easier.
I don't know if we'd call that making it easier. It simply means it's possible. You can make every decision right in this world and yet not have the chance to achieve that which the Rambam thinks one needs to achieve, because it may be look, someone who I don't know, in the Rambam's thought, someone who lives through a difficult period and dedicates their lives to rescuing people who are under threat, who are impoverished or dying, is making every single choice right, but is still missing something from their spiritual development, because they're dedicating their lives to that which they need to do, but there's aspects of spiritual development that they simply don't have time to do. Life has a cost to it, even when making right decisions. And therefore, the Rambam sees a necessity for the Yemos HaMashiach in order for one to correct that. Rambam himself writes about this, that as a doctor, he needed to spend a large amount of time healing people. He was a communal leader who had to spend a lot of his time seeing people from morning to evening. There's a letter in which he writes to one of his students, followers more accurately, in Provence, from the Ibn Tabun family, who wanted to come and visit him. And he says, you won't gain anything from visiting me. I'm busy from morning to night on communal responsibilities and medical responsibilities. I don't have time anymore for intellectual pursuits. It's clear that the Rambam felt he didn't maximize his own potential because of the demands on his time. Now, in this context, he made every decision correctly. He had to do that, but nonetheless, he lost out from so doing. You and someone else have been asking me quite a lot in the share context about working versus being able to dedicate one's life to intellectual pursuits and so on and so forth. Sure. But both halves are possible. It's equally correct to say that the Rambam is very firmly of the view that it would be wrong to take tzedakah, for example, and give up a life of maintaining oneself, and also recognize that a price might be paid for that. In the same way as a price might be paid to go out and rescue, if someone is in front of you and needs rescuing, you may need to sacrifice other important things. And therefore, this is the concept of Yemos HaMashiach. So I don't think it's about lowering the bar of Bechira, simply rather than maximizing the opportunity that correct Bechira, correct choices gives one.
But the only people who are going to benefit from that are the people who are there when Mashiach comes, and the people after that. All the people before that won't be there.
Hence the concept of Techiat HaMetim. That's exactly right. That is the summary of, to the best of our understanding, why the Rambam thinks Techiat HaMetim is necessary.
So Techiat HaMetim, we're still having Bechira there as well.
So it would appear according to the Rambam, that's right, yes. Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
Why not go straight to Techiat HaMetim? What's the point of having the Lemiyos HaMashiach in between?
The Moshe Mashiach, according to the Rambam, is simply that period for those who are anyway alive at that time.
But what if you're missing out the people and then you have to correct that by Techiat HaMetim? Why not go straight to Techiat HaMetim?
You are effectively Mashiach is simply the period. Do you mean straight after someone dies? Why they don't go to Techiat HaMetim?
No, that there's a point in time where I suppose everything stops and goes to Techiat HaMetim rather than have a period of Limos HaMashiach.
No, it's a merged period. Those who are alive when Mashiach comes live straight into Yemos Mashiach, and those who are dead come back through Techiat HaMetim to experience Yemos Mashiach era. So
at the same time. At the same time.
Yeah. They will re-enter and live through the time of Mashiach. That's right. That's Rambam's understanding of Techiat HaMetim. But it won't necessarily happen immediately, but it will happen during this era of Yemos Mashiach. The point is, and you are correct to pick up on this, that the Rambam counts Techiat HaMetim as one of the Ikrim, as a fundamental of faith. It doesn't seem to be necessary profoundly and in an integral way in his philosophical system. According to the Mekubalim, the question is why have this attachment of Techiat HaMetim? Just seems like to sort of complicate the story. We're born and we live. Okay, I get that. It's here. We live in a world of free choice. Okay, we get that. To achieve and make decisions, fine. And then we end up in a spiritual existence as we understand that. And then the story starts again and we're reborn. It's so strange. So in the Kabbalists, there's a very fundamental answer to that question. It's because we human beings are not just souls, we're souls and bodies. We need to live as bodies because we need to live holistically. In the Rambam, it just seems this extra complication. What's it for? And this is why the critics of the Rambam attacked him and said, you don't really believe in Techiat HaMetim, because if we understand your system well, the real existence is just the spiritual existence without a body. What do you need a body for in any of this story? And the Rambam wrote his response, his Igeres Techiat HaMetim, in order to defend himself and say, no, of course I believe in it. But there's no doubt that in the Rambam it's less of a core fundamental in terms of the process of human existence. It's there to resolve a problem, the problem of lack of opportunity, seemingly according to the Rambam. And it doesn't fit neatly in that sense into the Rambam's philosophical system. The Rambam here also, when it gets to Techiat HaMetim, has to admit, however much of a rationalist I am, here we're talking about a super rational event. We're talking about an event that doesn't fit the normal course of nature. We're talking about an event that is fundamentally non-philosophical, isn't within the course of the normal running of the world. The Rambam is troubled by. He wants the world to be tov. The world fundamentally should be good. It shouldn't need additional tweaking in order to make it good.
Okay, last question. This means that those people who have died before Limos HaMashiach will only come back in body and in as a neshama and body, right, with a guf. They won't go through Limos HaMashiach at all. So why do they miss out on that?
No, they will come back during the Limos HaMashiach and they will live through the Messianic era.
But they'll miss the beginning.
Yeah, no one lives through the whole of the Messianic era, because the Rambam writes explicitly that Mashiach will die, and the people who are alive in Yemos Mashiach will die. That's the whole point, that people don't live through the whole era. They eventually die. The Rambam says they will live long lives, right, because without the stress of life, one will live a longer life. But nonetheless, one won't live through the whole of that period.
The only question is, why are we treating people who are alive at Limos HaMashiach differently from those people who have already died?
When again, and I'll stop here. Just listen to the recording again if this isn't clear. I just want to reiterate once more. Sorry. Those who come back through Techiat HaMetim, live through Yemos HaMashiach in exactly the same way as someone who is alive when Mashiach comes, lives through Yemos HaMashiach. Someone who's alive when Mashiach comes will have X years of Messianic era in their life till eventually they die. And someone who is reborn again through Techiat HaMetim will live through X years of time of Yemos HaMashiach, through which they die. So again, I apologize it's not clear, but I think I've said
it's fine.
as much as I can on the matter.
Thank you.
Okay, any other points on this before I go on?
Yeah, according to the Rambam, what is the difference between those people who already died now and when they after they've died again the second time? What's the difference between the two existences, as it were, or non-existence?
Sorry, the difference between those who have.
Yeah, everyone who's died now is in what we say Olam HaBa, or Olam HaMetim now. So what's the difference between that Olam HaBa and the Olam HaBa according to Rambam that they'll have later?
Ah, okay, fine. I don't know if there's a significant difference. Both are only soul existence, only spiritual existence, not physical existence. The only difference would appear to be that people haven't yet had this Techiat HaMetim, Yemos HaMashiach, a Messianic era life opportunity in which they can maximize their potential. As we've explained, because in this physical world, we don't always have the chance to maximize our potential. But in principle, after death, one enters into an only spiritual existence, and that, in a sense, that's the ultimate existence that we have according to the Rambam, not an embodied existence, not a physical existence, but a solely spiritual existence. As you say, the only difference is, the only point is, we hasn't yet lived through Mashiach era, and therefore haven't yet had the chance to maximize one's potential.
Could it be that you get more of a ringside seat second time round as opposed to being in the upper circle or something, because you've gone through another period where you've been able to improve yourself, hence you're much closer to Kodesh Baruch Hu? Is that what you're saying?
That's
you've
just
got a second chance.
Yeah, the hope is that post the era of Mashiach, even those who didn't have the opportunity previously will have had the chance to spiritualize themselves and therefore achieve more. That's exactly right. That's the point of that era. Okay, so I think that brings us from a philosophical point of view to the end of what I wanted to say. I just wanted to cover very briefly a little bit about Mashiach ben Yosef and a little bit about Gilgulim, just because I've been asked to speak about them. I don't have a tremendous amount to say on either, and this is a reflection of my limitations. However, I'll just comment very briefly about both of them. So the idea of Mashiach ben Yosef is not one we're told much about. It's this idea of a Mashiach which will precede Mashiach ben David, not achieve the full Messianic era, but somehow set the process in motion and perhaps enter into a battle against the forces of evil and defeat them, and yet in the moment of defeat die, then to be followed by Mashiach ben David, who will usher in the Messianic era. The mention in Nigla sources, not in the mystical sources, but in the revealed sources, the concept of Mashiach ben Yosef is mentioned in the Gemara in Sukkah, Daf Nun Beis Amud Aleph, and also in the Yerushalmi mentions the idea of Mashiach ben Yosef. Those are in terms of sort of the classic sources of Gemara, of Talmud. It's mentioned also in numerous midrashim and in the Zohar and other more mystical sources, and also mentioned by Rasad Yugon, who we'll come back to later. Rasad Yugon from the later era of the Gaonim wrote a work of philosophy, Emunah V'Deus. In many respects, Rasad Yugon preceded the Rambam as a systemic philosopher of Judaism. He's the first source of Ikrei Emunah, a sort of an attempt to classify fundamentals of faith. Whether he meant exactly the same by that as the Rambam is we'll see, is not so clear cut. And he writes about a lot of philosophical ideas. The Rambam sometimes agreed with him, sometimes disagreed with him, but he was endeavoring. He was in a sense in the same milieu, the same intellectual background as the Rambam. That even though he lived in Egypt, by the way, he was born in Egypt and then moved to the seat of the Gaonim in Bavel, but by then Bavel has already moved into the Muslim sphere, into the Muslim world. He had become Arabic speaking. He wrote in Arabic, and he was already dealing with the Arabic tradition, the Arab tradition, the Muslim tradition of philosophy, heavily influenced by the Greeks, by Plato and Socrates and Aristotle and so on. So he's a philosopher in that sense. And Rasad Yugon does also write about Mashiach ben Yosef. So these are the sources of what we know about Mashiach ben Yosef. In the Nigla texts, in the revealed texts, the Gemara that I mentioned in Rasad Yugon, and certain midrashim, and in the Kabbalistic sources, the Zohar and other midrashim. The Rambam doesn't mention him. the Rambam ascribes both these roles to Mashiach ben David. That Mashiach ben David will fight the battles and so on. And this is certainly the more accessible and sort of mainstream approach, as it were, to the topic. Now, what can we understand to relate to this idea of Mashiach ben Yosef? Why is it necessary to have these two figures? Again, I don't really know. It's not that easy to say too much about. However, it would appear to reflect the idea that emerges from countless sources in which we see Malchus and kingship divided between Yosef and Yehuda. Mashiach ben David, of course, is a descendant of Yehuda, and Mashiach ben Yosef is a descendant of Yosef. And we find just by reading the stories of Torah, and this is a theme that runs through Nach more than we perhaps notice or acknowledge, that you have this dual relationship between Yehuda and Yosef, in which they both compete or share sometimes uneasily the kingship of Yisrael, of Klal Yisrael. We're aware, and I don't need to repeat. Of course, this goes back to the very lives of the Shvatim themselves, of the sons of Yaakov themselves, in which Yosef and Yehuda both emerge as the kings and the leaders of the family. Not by dint of birth, neither of them were Uvein, they're not the firstborns, and yet they emerge as the kings. And the kingship of Yosef precedes the kingship of Yehuda, and yet the kingship of Yosef doesn't last, and ultimately Yehuda is the one that steps forward and becomes the ultimate king, mirroring this Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben David type description. Now, if one thinks this is just a one-off in history, we will come back to the lives of the Shvatim in a few moments. If one thinks this is a one-off in history, this isn't correct. This is a rupture that runs through the whole of Jewish history. Yehuda and Yosef are always, in some shape or form, there's a tension between them. I mean by that both that they are numerically the largest tribes you see in the rest of the Torah, they're numerically the largest tribes, but there's a leadership tension between them also. The first, this isn't quite Yehuda and Yosef, but the first kings of Yisrael are Shaul, who's from Binyamin, a descendant of Rachel and the sort of younger branch of Yosef, and then superseded again by David, who is from the house of Yehuda. David's kingship, base David, eventually breaks into two. His kingdom is divided between David's grandson, Rehoboam, the son of Shlomo, and Yerovam, who is the descendant of Yosef of Ephraim. So the kingship of Yehuda is never reunited again under base David, and will never be reunited till Mashiach ben David, or perhaps Mashiach ben Yosef, and then Mashiach ben David, which restores this connection. And this rupture in Klal Yisrael between these two poles of influence, between Yosef and Yehuda, is a very painful one. It's very much on the minds of Klal Yisrael, of the Jewish people. This idea that we're one Klal Yisrael, we're one Bnei Yisrael, and yet we're divided into these two political entities. Because again, when one reads the stories of Tanakh, if one doesn't realize this, but for the vast majority of the period of the first Beis HaMikdash, the Jewish kingdom is split into two countries, two national entities, which are not always getting on with each other. And this is somehow like an aberration in the concept of Am Yisrael and Bnei Yisrael and Am Hashem that was split into two. And this is a theme that Nevi'im talk about, and when they refer to the restoration of the world the way it ought to be, and the era of Mashiach, there needs to be a rebinding of this rupture that's occurred in Klal Yisrael. This is mentioned in Haftorahs that we read in the Haftorah of Vayigash, coming from Yechezkel. This is something that's spoken about. Koyam Hashem Elokim, Hinei ani lokeach es eitz Yosef asher b'yad Ephraim v'shifti Yisrael chaveirav v'nosate Yisrael malav eitz Yehuda v'asisim le'eitz echad. I'll take the stick or the wood of Yosef in the hands of Ephraim, meaning there's a stick of Yosef which is currently held in the hands of Ephraim, meaning the kingdom founded by a descendant of Ephraim, and I'll merge it with the stick of Yehuda and make them into one stick. There'll be a rebinding, a grafting together of these two elements. And we find, by the way, the unique part of Yosef's role is his ability to fight evil and destroy it in a way that Yehuda doesn't have, and yet Yehuda is able to bring ultimate healing in a way that Yosef can't. And again, I want to share where this is reflected in Psukim, brought in Rashi al HaTorah on the story of Yehuda and Yosef, and then just reflect upon that in the lives of a Yehuda and a Yosef. So there's a pasuk in Avadia which Rashi al HaTorah quotes, V'haya beis Yaakov eish or beis Yosef lahava, or beis Yosef lakash. Yaakov's house is a fire, but it's Yosef which is the spark which carries the fire, and the Beis Esau is the house of Esau is the kash, is the straw which gets burnt up. V'dolku v'hem v'achlum, and through that it will catch a light and consume them. V'lo yesorid lebeis Esau, and there will be no remnants of the house of Esau. In other words, Yosef who's able to translate the fire of Yosef into a force, of the fire of Yaakov into a force that can burn away Esau. Rashi brings this on Torah, commenting on why it's only when Yosef is born that Yaakov begins setting his mind to returning from the house of Lavan back to Eretz Yisrael and feels able to confront Esau in so doing. So this is the unique ability and power of Esau. Now again, I just want to remind you of some of the stories in the Torah. We have an encounter between a Yosef and a seductress, and a Yehuda and a seductress. This is the story of Yehuda and Tamar, and the story of Yosef, which Eshes Potiphar. So they both face extreme temptation. Now, I'm not going to go into the story here of Tamar, who of course wasn't a seductress. In truth, she was an incredible and righteous lady. But at least Yehuda's reading of the story is that this is what's going on. And the two stories are merged and intertwined in a very strange manner. Right in the middle of the story of Yosef, we find an encounter of Yehuda. Yehuda and Yosef are two very different sorts of heroes. Yosef fights the challenge and doesn't fall for it. And on occasion, when Yosef does fall, later on in history, he doesn't have the same ability to re-emerge from that. Yehuda fails, but he's able to emerge and come back alive because he's able to fix up his mistake. Yehuda is the one who's got the gift of teshuvah, the famous story of Yehuda, Tzodka mimeni, she is more righteous than me. His very name, Yehuda, coming from the word hodah, which means thanks in the context of how Leah says it, but hodah also means to admit. The concept of thanks and the concept of admission in Hebrew are the same words. Hodot means to thanks and hodah means to admit. Vidah is confession, all exactly the same root, linked by the way to the word David also, which is etymologically akin to this. And these are all admission and confession and acknowledgement. Being able to thank takes an admission, an acknowledgement, a recognition, admission of weakness and vulnerability and inability. I need you in order to achieve that which I'm able to achieve. So Yehuda saves himself to his ability to be a Baal Teshuvah, to his ability to do Teshuvah, to correct himself. And we find this sort of dichotomy all the way through. Chazal already point out that when Shaul HaMelech, this is a Gemara in Yoma, and Daf Chav Beis, Omer Rav Hana, Kama lecholi v'lo magish gavra d'Moisei, says, Shaul ba'achas v'olsolo, David b'shtayim v'olsolo. If we read the life of Shaul in contrast to David, it is not obvious at all that Shaul was this flawed and failed leader, and David was this enormous success. On the contrary, we find Shaul making relatively few mistakes, and yet losing the kingdom because of this, and David seemingly making many mistakes, and yet maintaining his kingship in this. Now, I'm not going to go here into the subject of the sins of great people and to what degree David did or didn't sin. It's, of course, a machlokas in the Gemara and so on. I don't want to go into any of that. But the fact is, reading Nach in Pshuta Shel Mikra, when it's telling us something, David doesn't seem to be this incomparably better character than Shaul HaMelech. And yet, in the language of the Gemara Yoma, Shaul makes one mistake, V'ochas v'olsolo, and that's it. It condemns him. David makes two or more mistakes, and he survives. And the difference is, you just read the story in Tanakh, the difference is their response. Shaul is attacked, and not attacked, is criticized by Shmuel, and he immediately goes into defense. He says, the people made the mistake, they asked me to do this, and it wasn't my fault. And then Shmuel says, you've lost your kingdom, and his immediate response is, at least still give me the kavod and the dignity, let me not be shamed in public. David HaMelech has this great ability to confess. So he's inherited the midah of his ancestor, Yehuda, in which he does make mistakes, but he's able to be moda. He's able to correct his mistakes and do teshuvah for so doing. And this is seems to be linked to this pattern of Moshiach ben Yosef and Moshiach ben David. Moshiach ben Yosef has this tremendous ability to fight, to tear away at evil, but can't do the tikkun, can't do the repair on the mistakes that we already have been made, and therefore ultimately dies in the process. And superseded, a Yosef is always superseded by a Yehuda, who's the only one who's able to finish off the task. Because the only way ultimately of defeating evil isn't by burning it away as per Yosef, but is by elevating it, by correcting it, by repairing it, by doing the process of teshuvah, which sublimates, which uses the mistakes that have been made as a way to learn and grow further from. This is what the concept of teshuvah is. How do we deal with the mistake that's been made? We've done something wrong. What are we meant to do with it? How can we correct it? What is this mysterious idea that somehow teshuvah helps us undo the mistakes of the past? And the answer to the question is only because we can take that which is bad and make it as a cause of good, because we've learned from the experience, we've grown from the experience, and therefore that which was wrong actually is a positive. And therefore, this is the concept of Moshiach ben David, who has this ability to bring teshuvah into the world. And therefore, the only one that can bring the final Moshiach, the second stage of Moshiach, isn't this powerful force of Yosef, which is this burning spark which can channel the energy of a Yaakov and burn away the base Esau, the house of Esau. That's not enough. We need something else. We need the base David, the Moshiach ben David, to do this. So this is a sort of reading of the psukim of this idea of Moshiach ben Yosef. The Arizal, who represents the school of the Mekabalim, writes that we don't find any source that Moshiach ben Yosef is an inevitable necessity. It's possible this will all be achieved by Moshiach ben David, depending how we set out and how history develops and so on. But anyway, these are the sources of the idea of Moshiach ben Yosef. They're found in a Gemara. They're found primarily in the mystical literature and in the Zohar and mystical Medrashim. They're also quoted by Rasadi Gon. The Rambam, however, does not paskin or does not bring the concept of Moshiach ben Yosef to the best of my knowledge. So that's a little bit about Moshiach ben Yosef. I'll pause there just in case there are any comments or questions about that. By the way, we find, even in the Milchama against Amalek, we find a similar idea. The first battle against Amalek is led by Yehoshua, who of course is a descendant of Ephraim. The second battle against Amalek is led by Shaul. Neither of them managed to finish the job. And the final battle, the third battle against Amalek is led by Mordechai against Haman, who's Ishimini, again from the Rachel branch of the family. But the final battle is led by a descendant of Yehuda. The real divide, in a sense, gets back to Rachel and Leah. Rachel has a perfection that Leah doesn't have, but dies and doesn't succeed in carrying this on. Leah has a much more difficult life. She has to struggle to get there, but eventually achieves what she's meant to achieve. So these are the pattern of a difference between them. We find this with Yehoshua and Kalev, right? The two Meraglim who managed to emerge successfully from the episode of the Meraglim. All the others fail, but two Meraglim, one from the house of Yehuda, and one from the house of Yosef, from Ephraim, Yeshua, managed to survive. They're the two leaders who emerge from this. But again, they survive differently. Yeshua emerges with strength. He almost sort of sails through this, and Kalev gets there with the kvetch, with the struggle, with the difficulty in a Yehuda-like manner as opposed to a Yosef-like manner. And the theme, anyway, I mean, just reading Nach, you just see this theme emerge from so many stories in Nach. And this seems to be what this sort of midrashic idea of Moshiach ben Yosef and Moshiach ben David is. I just want to conclude. Next week we will look at Gilgulim a little bit, but I just want to conclude by saying that the Rambam ultimately, as in so many other things, has words of caution, which I think, dare I say, should be the last words on the subject, which is ultimately we don't know that much about these things. And the Rambam, after speaking about Yemos Mashiach and how things will unfold, says, look, you know, there's a limit to what we can say about this. We're trying to piece together a sort of framework of understanding based on the little hints that are given to us by the Medrash and by the Gemaras and by the Psukim and the various sources we have. Ultimately, we're not going to know how this works until Mashiach comes and we see it in action. So what, I hear you say, is the point of talking about all these ideas? The answer is, I think it's important to have some understanding of what sort of process we're talking about. And I think the concepts that emerge from this are enormously important. we need to think about what are we as human beings? Are we souls or are we souls and bodies? We need to think about what spirituality is. To what degree is spirituality an intellectual process? To what degree is it a holistic process? As per the machlokas of the Rambam and the Mekubalim. And we need to think about making the world a better place. And perhaps in this context of our most recent discussion, adopting both a Yehuda and a Yosef mindset in our lives, and perhaps thinking in ourselves: are we Yosef people? Are we Yehuda people? What's our primary way of serving Hashem? And who should we? How should we set about doing so? We don't know which tribes we come from. The Gemara still brings that in the era of the Gemara, when they had apparently almost lost the tradition as to which tribes they belonged to. Sometimes great Amoraim could look at a person and through their personality say you must be a descendant of tribe X or tribe Y. So for ourselves, we can't engage in that sort of genealogical speculation, but maybe we can think about which paths in Ruchnius we can adopt. So I'll conclude there unless any questions. And,
yeah, can I? Sorry, the answer may be listen to the tape, which is fine because I'm a bit slow on this. But it seems you get a second chance with the Rambam view, which is nice. You get two Olam HaBas with a Techiat HaMetim and a Moshe Mashiach in between. But with the Kabbalistic view, you don't get that second chance because you go straight to Techiat HaMetim, which is eternal.
That is correct, yes. And the reason you don't need or get that second chance is because of David's question before. David was quite right. If you're going in the Mekubalim's view, what do you need the second chance for? You deal with the hands you are dealt, and you make the best of those. It's about the choices you make and whether you maximize your opportunities, and that's it. According to the Rambam, there's a certain outcome that's needed. You need to become a certain sort of person who has achieved certain sorts of insight. And therefore, if you've never been given the chance to do it, never, very sad, but you won't have achieved those insights and opportunities. And therefore, you need the second chance.
So on this occasion, the Rambam view is the one that we prefer. Well, I prefer, yes.
I can't comment on that, Charles. I'm not taking sides on this. Yeah. I want to use your question to emphasize. David's question is that he was asking before, in which I said, listen to what I'm saying in the Rambam, is absolutely right. He's maybe his Shorish and Neshama is coming from the Kabbalists. What he's saying is correct in the view of the Mekubalim. The Rambam thinks you need the second chance.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
A pleasure. We'll stop there, and I wish everyone a good day, and looking forward to seeing you all, please God, next week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Zobin.
Thank you.